A CEO with everything to prove. A single father with nothing left to lose. One brutal decision made on bad information, and one rainstorm that forced them to face what she'd done. This is the story of what happens when power gets it wrong, and what it costs to make it right. If this story finds you tonight, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Follow along, and stay until the end, because this one doesn't let go easy. The morning Logan Mercer got fired, he was still thinking about the way his daughter had grabbed his sleeve. Not crying, said, Sophie didn't cry like other kids, she just held on. Both hands wrapped around his forearm, fingers pressing in like she could keep him there through sheer grip alone. Her small face tipped up at him with that look she'd been perfecting since she was about 4 years old. Part stubbornness, part fear, part something that always hit him somewhere just below the ribs. 5 more minutes, she'd said. Not a question. The gymnasium at Clover Hill Elementary had been decorated with paper chains and hand-painted banners that read, Father-Daughter Breakfast in uneven block letters, the kind of sign where you could tell a committee of 8-year-olds had been involved. Folding tables were covered in yellow plastic tablecloths. Scrambled eggs sat in aluminum trays under heat lamps. A dad 2 tables over was attempting to make a balloon animal out of a long red balloon, and mostly failing, his daughter watching him with the polite tolerance only a child who loves you completely can manage. Logan had checked his watch at 7:42. He'd already been there 40 minutes longer than he planned. Sophie, you said 7:30. I know what I said. It's not 7:30 anymore. I know that too. He picked up his coffee, which had gone cold, and set it back down. I have to get to work, Bug. You know that. Miss Patterson's dad left at 7. Sophie glanced across the room at a girl with braids who was now sitting with her mother instead, the mother looking slightly uncomfortable in the dad-heavy room. But Miss Patterson's dad doesn't live with her anymore. Logan looked at his daughter for a moment. 8 years old, and already she had this way of laying things out, not to be cruel, just to be precise. Her mother used to do the same thing. Claire had always said exactly what she meant, stripped down, no decoration on it. Sophie had inherited that from her almost perfectly, along with her gray eyes and the way she chewed her thumbnail when she was working through a problem. 5 more minutes, he said. Sophie let go of his sleeve. They ate the rest of the scrambled eggs together, and Logan listened to her explain the rules of a card game 3 of her friends had invented at recess, a game that seemed to involve a complicated point system and the ability to declare someone frozen for up to 2 turns. He didn't fully understand it. He told her it sounded unfair to the frozen people. She told him that was kind of the point. At 7:51, he kissed the top of her head, told her to have a good day, reminded her that Mrs. Galvez next door would pick her up at 3:15, and walked out of the Clover Hill Elementary Gymnasium into a morning that was already bright and already running ahead of him. He got to his truck, sat down, and looked at the time. He was going to be late. Logan Mercer had worked at Sterling Dynamics for 3 years. It wasn't the kind of company that ended up in magazines unless the article was about industrial supply chain logistics, which meant it almost never ended up in magazines. Sterling Dynamics sourced, warehoused, and distributed components for mid-size manufacturing clients up and down the eastern seaboard. It was not glamorous work. It was not the kind of work you told people about at parties and watched their eyes light up. But it was consistent, it paid reasonably well, and Logan was genuinely good at it. His official title was Regional Logistics Coordinator, which was a long way of saying he managed the flow of parts and materials between the company's distribution hub and about a dozen client facilities scattered across 3 states. He dealt with freight schedules, inventory discrepancies, vendor delays, and the occasional warehouse manager who believed the rules of time and physics didn't apply to his particular loading dock. He had a reputation in the office for being steady, not flashy, not loud, not the guy who stayed until 10 at night making himself visible. Just steady. He came in, he worked, he solved problems before they became crises, and he went home to his daughter. In 3 years, he had never been late. He'd been early on days his truck had a flat. He'd called in from the hospital parking lot twice. Once when Sophie had an ear infection bad enough to require an IV antibiotic. Once when he'd dislocated a finger on a Saturday and driven himself to urgent care on Sunday so he could be at his desk Monday morning. He didn't do these things to impress anyone. He just understood, in the way that single parents who are also the only paycheck understand, that the margin for error in his life was extremely narrow. He pulled into the Sterling Dynamics parking lot at 8:34, which was 34 minutes after the official start of his shift. He sat in his truck for about 15 seconds, took a breath, and got out. The logistics floor was already running when he pushed through the side entrance. The sound of forklifts and pallet jacks and the specific low-grade chaos of a warehouse starting its morning cycle. His desk was at the edge of the floor, separated from the main space by a half wall of glass, and he could see from the doorway that the morning's freight manifest was already pulled up on his screen. Someone had started it for him. Probably Marcus, the floor supervisor who was constitutionally incapable of leaving a problem alone. Logan set his bag down, pulled off his jacket, and started working. He'd been at his desk maybe 20 minutes when the call came, not from his direct manager, Gary, who Logan would have expected. From HR, specifically from a woman named Diane, who had a careful voice and a habit of over-explaining things in a way that suggested she found her own job uncomfortable. "Logan, could you come up to the 4th floor? Conference room B." "Right now?" "If you can." He logged off his workstation, took the stairs, he always took the stairs, and walked into conference room B to find Diane sitting on one side of the table with a folder in front of her and a man Logan didn't recognize sitting beside her. Legal, Logan guessed, from the way the man was dressed, and the way he was already not making eye contact. And at the head of the table, standing rather than sitting, was Avery Sterling. Logan had seen Avery Sterling exactly twice in 3 years. Once at the company's annual all-staff meeting, where she'd spoken for about 15 minutes from a stage and then left. Once in the elevator, where they'd ridden 4 floors in silence and she'd spent the whole time looking at her phone. She was not someone who wandered the floor. She was not someone who knew the names of logistics coordinators. She was 30 years old and she looked it, not in a bad way, just in the way that someone looks when they've been under sustained pressure for long enough that it starts to show in how they hold their jaw. Her hair was dark and pulled back, and she was wearing a suit jacket over a white shirt, no tie, collar open, which somehow made her look more formal rather than less. She had the specific expression Logan had seen on exactly one other type of person in his life, and that was young officers given authority they weren't entirely sure they'd earned yet. Not incompetence. Something more like hypervigilance, the look of someone who is never entirely sure they're not about to be found out. "Mr. Mercer," she said, "thank you for coming up." "Sure," Logan said. He didn't sit down because nobody told him to, and something about the setup made sitting feel like the wrong move. Avery Sterling picked up a document from the table without looking away from him. "I'll be direct with you. We've reviewed your attendance records going back to the beginning of this quarter, and there's a pattern of late arrivals and early departures that represents a consistent violation of company attendance policy. This morning was the most recent instance, but it wasn't the first." Logan said carefully, "I'm sorry?" "The record shows 6 instances of late arrival in the past 8 weeks and 3 instances of leaving before the scheduled end of shift. Combined with this morning, we're looking at a pattern that's been flagged by your department head." Something went cold and quiet inside Logan's chest. He knew the records she was talking about. He knew them the way he knew his own handwriting. He had pulled in late 3 times this quarter. Once for a school meeting he'd flagged to Gary in advance, once for a pediatrician appointment, once because there was a 4-car accident on Route 9 that backed traffic up for 2 miles. He had left early twice, once to pick up Sophie when Mrs. Galvez had a family emergency, once because he'd had a fever of 101 and Gary had told him to go home. 6 late arrivals. 3 early departures. That wasn't his record. "That's not accurate," he said. Avery's expression didn't change. The data was reviewed by our COO and verified by HR before this meeting. "I understand that." Logan kept his voice level. This was a thing he'd learned a long time ago. Not in an office, but in uniform, where the stakes for losing your composure were considerably higher. "Stay level. Think before you speak. But the numbers you're describing don't match my actual attendance. I've had documented exceptions this quarter, all flagged in advance to my direct supervisor. I can pull my records." "The records we have," Diane began. "I'd like to see them," Logan said. A pause. Avery Sterling looked at him. There was something in her face that he couldn't read. Not quite certainty, not quite doubt. Something in between that she was working hard to keep off the surface. Mr. Mercer, she said, I want to be clear that this decision wasn't made lightly, but given the documented pattern— What decision? Another pause. Shorter. Effective today, your employment with Sterling Dynamics is being terminated. The room was very quiet for a moment. Logan could hear the faint hum of the HVAC system. He could hear distantly the sound of the warehouse floor below them. He thought about Sophie's hands on his sleeve that morning. Both hands, fingers pressing in. 5 more minutes. He thought about the mortgage payment that came out on the 15th. He thought about Sophie's after-school program, which cost $400 a month and which she loved more than almost anything. The one where they did art and some light coding and she'd made a papier-mâché volcano that had taken her 3 weeks. He thought about Claire, which he tried not to do in situations where he needed to be functional, but sometimes she showed up anyway. He looked at Avery Sterling and said, Okay. Okay, Diane said, like she'd expected something else. I'm not going to argue in a conference room, Logan said. If the decision's been made, it's been made. He looked at Avery. I'll need the formal documentation in writing, and I'd like to clear my desk. Avery Sterling held his gaze for a moment. He'd expected something, relief or vindication, or the particular brisk efficiency of someone who has done something difficult and wants to move past it quickly. Instead, she looked at him with something that, if he'd had more reason to trust his own read of her, he might have called uncertain. You'll have everything in writing within the hour, she said. Thank you, Logan said. He meant it without sarcasm, which was the strangest part. He was angry. He knew that, could feel it sitting in his chest like a stone, but not at her specifically, not yet. More at the general situation, the particular cruelty of a morning that had started with his daughter not wanting him to leave and was ending with this. He walked back down the stairs, cleared his desk in 11 minutes. He traveled light, had never been the kind of person who accumulated things in workspaces, packed his bag, said goodbye to Marcus, who looked stricken and asked twice if there was anything he could do, and walked out through the side entrance into the September morning. He sat in his truck. He had a shift at the deli counter at Hartley's Grocery, starting at 6 that evening. He picked up 12 hours a week there when he needed the buffer. He'd probably need the buffer now. He started the truck and drove home to figure out what came next. Avery Sterling had inherited Sterling Dynamics 18 months ago, and she was still not entirely sure she deserved it. That wasn't something she said out loud. You didn't say that out loud when you were the CEO of a $40 million company and half your board was already watching you like they were waiting for you to trip. Her father had built Sterling Dynamics from a 2-person operation in a rented warehouse, and everyone who'd worked with him knew it, and everyone who worked with her knew she hadn't. What she had was an MBA from Penn, 4 years at a logistics consulting firm in Philadelphia, and the particular determination of someone who has been told, in so many words, that they're good but not sure to be great. Her father had told her that. Not cruelly. Robert Sterling had not been a cruel man, but honestly, in the way he did everything. You're good, Avery. I think you might be great. I'm just not sure yet. He died before he could be sure, and she'd been living inside that uncertainty ever since. The Mercer situation had landed on her desk in a thick folder courtesy of Victor Langley, her COO, who'd been with the company 11 years and who operated with the specific confidence of a man who believed he understood the machinery of the place better than anyone else in the building. Victor was thorough. Victor had numbers. Victor had printed attendance logs and a summary memo and a note from Gary, the logistics manager, which had apparently been forwarded to Victor's office rather than to HR directly because Gary had gone on paternity leave 2 weeks ago, and his replacement was still getting up to speed. Avery had looked at the file the night before. She'd looked at it again at 6 in the morning. She'd asked Diane to verify. Diane had checked against what was in the system and confirmed. She made the call. She went into the room. She did what the data told her needed to be done. Now she was back in her office on the 5th floor, standing at the window with a cup of coffee that was too hot to drink yet, looking at the parking lot below, and she could see Logan Mercer walking to his truck. He walked the way certain people walked, Not fast, not slow, just deliberate. Like he knew where his feet were at all times. He put his bag in the passenger seat, got in, sat there for about 30 seconds, and then the truck pulled out of the lot. Avery watched until he was gone and then turned away from the window. She had a board call at 10, a vendor meeting at noon, and a budget review at 3. She had, by her count, 6 different things that were more urgent than a single terminated logistics coordinator. She picked up her coffee and sat down at her desk. The folder was still there. She told herself she wasn't second-guessing it. She told herself that a leader who second-guesses every necessary decision is a leader who can't lead. Her father had told her that too, though in the context of a negotiation rather than a firing. Make the call, stick with the call, learn from the call. In that order, Avery, not in reverse. She pulled up her email. She answered 3 messages. She started on the 4th. She closed it without finishing. She picked up the folder and flipped to the attendance log. 6 late arrivals, 3 early departures. She followed them down the column with her finger, reading the dates. February 14th, March 3rd, March 19th, April 2nd, April 22nd, May 7th. Her finger stopped. April 2nd was a Tuesday. She remembered April 2nd because that was the day the building's server room had flooded and they'd lost half the East Wing's network for 6 hours, and she'd spent most of the day managing the fallout. She remembered it specifically because Victor had been in her office twice that day with update reports, and she'd had to send him away both times to deal with her own calls. She wasn't sure why she was thinking about April 2nd. She put the folder down and went back to her email. By noon, she'd stopped thinking about it. By 3, she was in the budget review, which was the kind of meeting that consumed everything. 2 hours of spreadsheets and competing priorities, and the particular low-grade tension of a company that was performing adequately but not spectacularly, which everyone in the room knew meant the margin for waste was thin. Victor Langley ran the budget review as he ran most operational meetings, with a combination of polish and authority that Avery generally found useful. He was 53, broad-shouldered, silver-haired, the kind of man who had learned to make thoroughness look effortless. He'd been her father's right hand for the last 6 years of Robert Sterling's life, which meant he knew things about the company she didn't, which was a dynamic she was working to change but hadn't finished changing yet. "The Mercer situation resolved this morning?" Victor said during a break between agenda items. Not in the meeting's formal flow, but in the brief between-items voice that suggested it was just a detail being cleared. "It did," Avery said. "Good. Clean breaks the right call in these situations. The longer you let it sit, the harder the extraction." Avery looked at him. Extraction. Figuratively speaking, Victor smiled. The smile was smooth, the kind that had been practiced until it looked natural. Disruptive patterns don't self-correct. You make the call, you move forward. "Right," Avery said. She moved forward. The meeting continued. Victor walked her through the Q3 restructuring proposal, which involved a reorganization of the Logistics and Operations Division, consolidating roles, streamlining reporting chains, reducing headcount in middle management by about 12%. It was aggressive but defensible, and the projected cost savings were real. Avery made notes. She asked questions. She told Victor she'd want to review the full proposal document before signing off. "Of course," Victor said. "I'll have it on your desk by Friday." She nodded. She kept her face neutral. She was good at that. After the meeting, she sat alone in the conference room for a few minutes before she went back upstairs. She wasn't sure why. She wasn't sure what she was thinking about. Outside, the September afternoon had turned cloudy. The weather report she'd seen that morning had said there was a storm system moving in from the west, likely to hit overnight. Heavy rain, possible thunder. She had dinner with her mother at 7:30. She'd have to leave by 6:30 to make it across town in traffic. She gathered her notes and went back to work. The storm hit at 9:15. Avery had made it to dinner, had made it through 2 hours of her mother's opinions on the company and the weather and the fact that Avery looked tired. "You always look tired now, Avery. You need to eat more." And had gotten back in her SUV on the other side of the city just as the first fat drops started hitting the windshield. By the time she was on Route 9 heading back toward her apartment, it was coming down hard. Not quite sheets, but close. The kind of rain where the wipers fight it and don't quite win. Where you can see the road, but it requires work. She had the defroster running and both hands on the wheel, and she was thinking about the Friday board call agenda when the dashboard lit up. Engine warning light, not a warning she'd seen before. The SUV was a lease, 14 months old, and it had done exactly nothing unusual in 14 months. The icon was red, which she understood was not a good color for engine icons, and almost immediately after it appeared, she felt the truck do something strange underneath her. A slight shudder, a loss of the smooth authority she was used to. She pulled to the shoulder as quickly as she safely could, which took about a quarter to a mile. She put it in park, turned on her hazards, and sat there while the rain hammered the roof and the hazard lights clicked in the dark. She called roadside assistance. The automated system told her the estimated wait was 70 to 90 minutes. She said, "What?" The automated system repeated it. She called the number again in case she'd heard wrong. She hadn't. 70 to 90 minutes, weather service delays. Would she like to stay on the line to confirm the request? She confirmed the request, hung up, and sat there in the dark with the rain coming down and the hazard lights clicking and the engine dead. She had her laptop in the bag behind her. She had half a cup of cold coffee in the cup holder. She had 2 bars of cell signal that kept dropping to 1. She was wearing a blazer and the light silk blouse she'd worn to dinner, which was a fine combination for a restaurant and a deeply impractical combination for the shoulder of Route 9 in a September rainstorm. She was fine. She told herself she was fine. This was an inconvenience, not an emergency. 70 to 90 minutes was annoying but manageable. 20 minutes passed, 40. The rain, if anything, got worse. A few cars went by us, headlights sweeping across her hazard lights, slowing slightly, continuing on. Nobody stopped, which she understood. You didn't stop for strangers on rainy highways at 10 o'clock at night. That was how sensible people operated. She was cold. The blouse was not warm and the blazer wasn't much better. And without the engine running, she wasn't running the heat, and the rain had dropped the temperature faster than she'd expected. She was considering whether to start the engine just for the heat. She'd read once that you shouldn't run a dead engine, but she couldn't remember why. When headlights appeared in her rearview mirror. A truck, from the height of them. Slowed. It pulled up behind her, hazard lights coming on to match hers. Avery felt a complicated mixture of relief and wariness. She cracked her window 2 inches, which felt like a reasonable compromise. The driver's door opened. Whoever it was didn't run. Walked deliberately in the rain, which struck her as either very calm or completely indifferent to being wet. He came up alongside her door, and she could see him in the amber wash of her hazard lights, and she recognized him before he said a word. She recognized the jacket, the way he moved, the same deliberate walk she'd watched from her 5th-floor window 12 hours ago. Logan Mercer knocked on her window with 2 knuckles. Not hard, almost politely. Avery stared at him for 1 full second that felt considerably longer, and then she rolled the window down. Rain spattered the door trim immediately. Logan looked at her with an expression that was entirely neutral, not warm, not cold, not surprised. "You okay?" he said. "Engine warning light," she said. I have roadside coming. Should be." She checked her phone. "About 30 more minutes." Logan nodded. He looked at the front of the SUV, which was mostly dark given the engine was off. Then he looked back at her. "It's cold," he said. "I'm fine." He looked at her silk blouse. He didn't say anything about it, but she saw his eyes move over it briefly in the way people do when they're noting a problem without commenting on it. "You want to wait in the truck?" he said. "Heater's running." Avery looked at him. The rain was running down his face, and he didn't appear to notice or care, just stood there on the shoulder of Route 9 in the dark getting wet, waiting for her answer. "You don't have to," she started. "I know," Logan said. A gust of wind hit the side of the SUV and rattled the door in its frame, and the rain picked up again, and Avery thought about $65 more in Uber surcharge just to get a car to stop in this weather, and 30 more minutes alone on a dark highway in a silk blouse. "Okay," she said. She grabbed her bag, pushed the door open, and got 2 steps toward Logan's truck before the rain hit her full in the face. He was already moving, not running to her, just moving ahead at an angle that put him slightly between her and the worst of the wind. Not gallant, exactly, more functional. Like blocking wind for a person was simply a thing you did when the person was standing next to you. He held the passenger door open. She got in. The truck cab smelled like coffee and something she couldn't identify. Maybe cedar, maybe just old leather. The heat was running, and it hit her immediately, and she hadn't realized how cold she was until the warmth reached her and her whole body unclenched in a way she hadn't been aware it was clenching. She pulled her bag into her lap. Logan walked around to the driver's side, got in, and sat down. In the narrow space between them, in the glow of the dashboard lights, Avery Sterling and Logan Mercer looked at each other for the first time without a conference table between them. "Thank you," she said. "It's fine," Logan said. It wasn't fine. They both knew it wasn't fine. She'd fired him 9 hours ago, and he was sitting here with the heat running while she warmed up in his truck on the side of a highway, and neither of them had addressed it yet. Avery cleared her throat. She was about to say something, an acknowledgement maybe, some version of "I know how this looks," when she heard a small sound from the back seat. She turned. In the back seat, curled on her side on a folded blanket, was a small girl. 8 or 9, Avery guessed. Dark hair spread across the blanket, one arm tucked under her cheek, wearing a fleece jacket with a wolf on it that was slightly too big for her, completely, deeply asleep in the specific way of children who trust their environment entirely. Avery turned back to Logan. "She was at a friend's for a sleepover," he said quietly, answering the question she hadn't asked. "Friend's mom called at 9:30. Sophie had a stomach ache and wanted to come home. I was already on my way back when I saw your lights." He'd been bringing his sick daughter home and stopped anyway. Avery sat with that for a moment. "She's beautiful," Avery said, and then felt slightly self-conscious about saying it, but it was true, and it was out now. Logan glanced back at his daughter. His expression did something. Softened isn't quite the right word, more like the guard that was running just under the surface shifted slightly sideways. "She's also going to be fine," he said. "Too many birthday cupcakes, probably." "How old?" 8. 8.5, she'd correct me. Avery almost smiled. Almost. She looked straight ahead through the rain-streaked windshield. The hazard lights on her SUV were still clicking in the dark, 50 yards back. "You didn't have to stop," she said. "No," Logan agreed. "Especially—" She stopped. "Especially given the morning," he finished, not with bitterness, just factually, the way he said most things. "Yes." "That's between me and the company," Logan said. "You being stuck in a rainstorm is a different thing." Avery looked at him. He was watching the road, or watching her SUV, or watching the rain. It was hard to tell. His hands were loose on the steering wheel even though the engine wasn't running. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "You can ask." "Why didn't you argue? In the conference room, you said the records were wrong and then you just stopped." Logan thought about it. Actually took a few seconds before he answered, which she hadn't expected. Most people either answered that kind of question immediately or deflected it. "Because arguing in that room wasn't going to do anything," he said. "You'd made the call. The documents were in front of you. I didn't have my records with me, and even if I had, you're not going to unfold a printout and change a CEO's decision in real time." He paused. "And I was angry. That's usually when people argue more." "I know." He glanced at her once. "I've learned not to say things I mean when I'm angry. Usually comes out wrong." Avery looked at her hands in her lap. Her nail polish was chipped on her left thumb. She'd been meaning to fix it for a week. A car passed them on the highway, slow, headlights sweeping. "The records are wrong," Logan said. It wasn't an accusation, just restating. "I'm beginning to wonder about that," Avery said, quietly enough that she wasn't sure he heard her. He heard her. His eyes moved to her face for a moment, then back to the windshield. They sat in the warm truck cab with the rain on the roof and the child sleeping in the back seat, and didn't say anything for a while. In the distance, Avery could see headlights that might be the roadside assistance truck, finally working its way toward them from the east. She thought about the folder on her desk. She thought about Victor Langley's smooth voice telling her clean break's the right call. She thought about April 2nd and why it was sitting in her head like something unfinished. She thought about the man sitting 3 feet away from her who had driven through a rainstorm to bring his sick daughter home and hadn't thought twice about stopping for the person who'd taken his job that morning. The roadside assistance truck pulled up behind her SUV, lights blazing in the rain. "That's them," Avery said. She reached for her bag, stopped, turned to Logan. "Thank you," she said again. Different this time. Not the reflexive courtesy of the first time, but something that carried more weight. Logan reached behind his seat without looking and pulled out a jacket. Canvas, worn at the elbows, the kind of jacket that had been used so many times it was shaped around the person who owned it. He handed it to her. "It's still raining," he said simply. She took the jacket. It was warm from where it had been sitting, and it smelled like everything else in the truck, coffee and cedar and something worn in. She pulled it around her shoulders and pushed the door open. "Logan," she said. He looked at her. "I'm going to look at the records again," she said, "the real ones." He didn't say thank you, and he didn't say I told you so, and he didn't say anything that would have been wrong in the moment. He just nodded once and looked back through the windshield at the rain. Avery got out of the truck. She walked through the rain to meet the roadside crew, wearing Logan Mercer's jacket over her silk blouse, and she felt, for the first time all day, the specific and uncomfortable sensation of being not quite sure of something she'd been entirely sure of that morning. Logan drove home through the rain with Sophie still asleep in the back seat. He carried her in from the truck. She was getting heavy for this, too old for it, really, but she stirred just enough to wrap her arms around his neck in her sleep, which made it feel worthwhile. He got her upstairs, got her shoes off, got her under the blanket, and stood in the doorway of her room for a moment the way he'd done since she was small enough to fit in one arm. Her room had drawings on the wall, animals mostly, and a few landscapes, and one drawing of a house with 4 windows and a tree in the yard that she'd made when she was 5 and that had moved with them to 3 apartments. The wolf fleece was in a pile on the floor. He'd make her put it away tomorrow. He went back downstairs, sat at the kitchen table, and opened his laptop. He found his old attendance records in his email archive. The flagged exception emails to Gary, the automated clock-in logs he'd downloaded a few months back just as a habit, the notes he'd sent himself when he had to leave early. He'd kept them not because he'd expected to need them, but because he was the kind of person who kept things. 3 late arrivals with advance notification, 2 early departures with manager approval, 1 incident on Route 9 in April, the accident, the 2-mile backup, the email he'd sent Gary from his phone in traffic. 6 instances and 3 instances. That wasn't his record. He looked at the numbers for a long time. Then he closed the laptop, drank a glass of water, and went to bed. He didn't sleep well. He lay in the dark and listened to the rain and thought about a lot of things. The mortgage, the logistics, job applications he'd start pulling tomorrow, Sophie's after-school program, the look on Avery Sterling's face in the truck when she'd said, "I'm beginning to wonder about that." He didn't let himself hope too much about that last one. Hoping too much about things was a luxury he'd given up around the same time he'd learned that the world doesn't rebalance on its own just because you were in the right. But he did think about it. He thought about it until he fell asleep, while the rain thinned out slowly over the city and the road outside went quiet and the maple tree in the backyard, still young, barely taller than the fence, moved gently in the last of the wind. The morning after the storm, Logan woke up at 5:47 without an alarm. He lay there for a minute in the dark, ceiling above him, the particular quiet of a house where nothing needed to happen yet. The rain had stopped some time before dawn. He could tell by the different quality of the silence, the way the street outside sounded dry again, the absence of the water-on-roof rhythm that had been running in the background all night. He got up, made coffee, and sat at the kitchen table with his laptop open. He had a routine for mornings like this, mornings with no job to go to, which he'd had before, twice, once right after leaving the Army, and once when a contract logistics firm he'd worked for folded with about 3 weeks' notice. The routine was simple. You made the coffee, you sat down, you looked at what you had and what you needed, and you built the list. Not the emotional list, not the one full of things you were angry or scared about. The practical list. The one that told you what to do with your hands for the next 72 hours. He updated his resume first. Took about 40 minutes because he was specific about it. He didn't pad, didn't inflate titles, didn't use the kind of language that turned logistics work into something that sounded like strategic leadership development. He wrote what he'd actually done. Managed freight scheduling for 12 client facilities. Reduced delivery discrepancy rate from 6.4% to 1.8% in 18 months. Coordinated emergency rerouting during the February supply disruption that saved 3 client contracts. Plain language, real numbers. He sent it to 4 job boards and 2 direct contacts before Sophie came downstairs at 7:15, wrapped in the oversized hoodie she wore as a bathrobe, hair flattened on one side from sleep. "How's the stomach?" he said. She considered this. "Okay," she said. "Better." "Good. You want eggs or cereal?" "Eggs." She pulled out the chair across from him and sat down, looking at the laptop screen. "Are you working?" "Looking for work," he said. She was quiet for a moment, processing this with the particular seriousness of a child who understood more than she should have to. "Did something happen at your job?" "Change of plans," Logan said. "Eggs first." "What?" Sophie went to school. Logan went back to the list. By 10 o'clock, he had 2 callbacks scheduled, one for Thursday and one the following Monday. He'd applied to 7 positions. He'd called his contact at a freight company in Hartford, who said there might be something opening up in October. No promises. He'd looked at the numbers: savings, available credit, what he could cover and for how long if the October opening didn't come through, and concluded that things were tight but manageable for about 3 months if he was careful. He was good at being careful. He'd had practice. He was on his 3rd cup of coffee and reading through a position description for a distribution center manager role in Newark. Too far, probably, but worth the call, when his phone rang. Unknown number, local area code. He almost didn't answer. Spam calls had gotten aggressive enough in the last year that unknown numbers were rarely worth the interruption. But he was job searching, which meant unknown numbers were sometimes the point. "Logan Mercer," he said. A brief pause, then, "It's Avery Sterling." He set his coffee down. "I got your number from your HR file," she said quickly, like she knew how that sounded and wanted to acknowledge it. I know it's not a normal call to make." "Okay," he said. "I went through the records this morning. The actual system logs, not the report Victor gave me." Another pause, shorter. "They're different." Logan was quiet. "The report he gave me had 6 late arrivals flagged. The system log shows 3, all with documented exceptions already in your file. 2 of them have advance approval from Gary in the notes." She stopped. He could hear something in her voice, not quite distress, but the particular tightness of someone who is saying out loud something they've been sitting with for a few hours, and it's gotten heavier as it sat. "I don't have all of it yet, but what I have it's not what I was shown." "No," Logan said. "It's not. I owe you an apology. I should have looked harder before I made that call." Logan stood up from the kitchen table and walked to the window. The backyard was still damp from the rain, the grass dark green, the maple in the corner holding its water in the leaves. "I appreciate you calling," he said. "I'm going to dig into this further," Avery said. I want to understand what I'm looking at before I say anything else, but I wanted you to know." "Okay," he said. "That's all. I don't want to give you false expectations about what happens next. I just wanted to call because you were right yesterday, and I told you the records didn't match, and then I let the meeting continue anyway, and that wasn't right." Logan leaned his shoulder against the window frame. Down the block, a man he didn't know by name but recognized by sight was walking a beagle, the dog working the edge of the sidewalk with its nose. Normal Tuesday morning, normal street. "I still have the jacket," Avery said. She seemed to catch herself, like she hadn't meant to say it. I can have someone return it." "Keep it," Logan said. "It's an old jacket." A beat. "Okay," she said. I'll be in touch." She hung up. Logan stood at the window a minute longer. He wasn't sure what he thought about the call. It was something, more than he'd expected, if he was honest, because he'd gone to bed last night having told himself not to expect much. But it wasn't his job back, and it wasn't an explanation, and he was still looking at a Newark job listing on a Tuesday morning with Sophie's after-school program balance due next week. He went back to the table and kept working. What? Avery spent most of Tuesday in the data. She didn't tell anyone what she was doing. She told Renee, her assistant, that she was working through some internal audit preparation and needed access to the raw attendance system logs for the Q2 to Q3 period, which was true enough and specific enough that Renee didn't ask follow-up questions. The logs came through as an export file. dense, unformatted, the kind of raw data that nobody looked at unless they were either building the reporting system or trying to understand what the reporting system was doing. Avery had written her graduate thesis on operational efficiency metrics. She knew how to read a data export. She worked through it methodically, the way her father had taught her. Start at the edges, not the middle. That's where things slip. And what she found in the first 2 hours was enough to make her stop and take a breath, and then start a separate document where she tracked every discrepancy she could find. Logan Mercer's record was the most obvious one. 3 late arrivals against the 6 reported, exactly as he'd said. 2 early departures against the 3 reported, both with manager approval in the system notes. The system logs were time-stamped and consistent. The report Victor had given her wasn't. But Mercer wasn't the only name. There were 4 others, all of them in the logistics and operations division, all of them middle-tier coordinators and supervisors, all of them with clean or near-clean actual records and inflated violation counts in the summary report. She cross-referenced against the Q3 restructuring proposal Victor had given her the day before, and her stomach went cold in a specific way that had nothing to do with the temperature in the building. The 12% headcount reduction in middle management, the consolidation of roles, the new efficiency framework Victor had proposed that would give his office significantly expanded oversight of the logistics division's budget allocation. She sat back in her chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then she pulled up the restructuring proposal document and read it again, more slowly. Victor Langley had been with the company for 11 years. He knew the operational infrastructure better than almost anyone still on payroll. He also had, she was realizing, had always had, she was realizing she'd never examined it closely, a particular kind of loyalty to the company that was actually a loyalty to the company as he wanted it to be. To his version of it, which was tidy and centralized and ran through him. She needed more before she could take this anywhere. She knew that. The data she had was suggestive but not complete. She was looking at attendance logs, not financials. And if there was something happening with the restructuring budget, she'd need someone from finance who wasn't reporting to Victor to help her run it down. She thought about calling her father's old attorney, a man named Dale Briggs who had done work for Sterling Dynamics for 20 years and who had the advantage of being old enough and independent enough that he was loyal to the company in a way that predated Victor entirely. She thought about it. She decided she needed 2 more days of data first. She closed the document, locked her screen, and sat in the quiet of her office with the particular feeling of someone who has just realized they've been standing on ground they thought was solid and finding out it wasn't. Logan picked Sophie up from school on Wednesday. It was his routine on days he wasn't working, and he had a lot of days like that now, to arrive early enough that he was already at the gate when her class came out. Sophie had strong feelings about being the last one picked up. He didn't entirely understand the feeling, but he respected it. She came out with her backpack listing to one side and a painting in her hand, something large and orange and complicated that might have been a sunset or might have been a fox. He couldn't tell from 20 feet. "Is that a fox?" he said. "It's a fire," she said, showing him the painting with the flat certainty of an artist who is not interested in the viewer's interpretation. "It's great," he said. She looked at it critically. "The bottom part is wrong." "What's wrong with the bottom part?" "It looks like a hat." She rolled it up carefully and tucked it under her arm. "Can we get hot chocolate?" It was 64 degrees. This was not hot chocolate weather by any reasonable measure, but she'd been asking for 2 days, and he'd been saying when it gets colder for 2 days, and he looked at her face and her rolled-up fire painting and thought about the week they'd both had. "Yeah," he said, "let's get hot chocolate." They went to the coffee place 2 blocks from school, a small, slightly cramped place that smelled like roasted beans and had a chalkboard menu and played old jazz that nobody in the shop appeared to be listening to. Sophie ordered the hot chocolate with extra whipped cream, which she always did, and Logan ordered a dark roast he probably didn't need, and they sat in the window seats. Sophie unwrapped the painting on the table and looked at the bottom part. "It really does look like a hat," she said. "Maybe it's a fire wearing a hat," Logan said. She gave him the look, the one that had come from Claire, the one that said, "I am choosing to tolerate this." "Fires don't wear hats." You don't know that." She took a long drink of hot chocolate, which left a whipped cream mark on her upper lip. She didn't wipe it off. "Dad," she said. "Yeah." Are you going to get a new job? Working on it, he said. Madison's dad lost his job last year, Sophie said, with the matter-of-fact tone she used for reporting information. He was sad for a long time. That's fair. Are you sad? Logan looked at his daughter across the small table. Her gray eyes, Claire's eyes, watching him with the particular quality of a child who wants the honest answer but is also 8 and can only carry so much of it. A little, he said. Mostly I'm annoyed. There's a difference. What's the difference? Sad is when something bad happened, and you can't do much about it, he said. Annoyed is when something bad happened and it wasn't fair and you know it. Sophie considered this. Annoyed sounds better. It feels better, he agreed. She went back to the painting, picking up a loose crayon from her bag and doing something corrective to the lower left corner. Logan drank his coffee and watched the street. His phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at it. A number he'd added to his contacts that morning. He hadn't been sure he would, but then he had. A text from Avery Sterling. I know this isn't the right channel for this. I found more. I think you should know. Can we talk tomorrow? He read it twice, put the phone face down on the table. Who's that? Sophie said, not looking up from the painting. Someone from work. Old work or new work? Old work. She made a small sound of acknowledgement and added another crayon stroke. The fire was starting to look less like a hat. Logan picked up his coffee and thought about what I found more meant. He'd had enough time in situations where information was incomplete, enough time in logistics, and before that in a uniform, working with supply chains that covered 3 time zones, to understand that the most dangerous moment in any investigation wasn't when you found nothing. It was when you found enough to know the shape of the problem, but not quite enough to do anything about it yet. He texted back, "Tomorrow's fine. Name the time." Her reply came in under a minute. 10 a.m. Is coffee okay? Coffee's fine, he wrote. Sophie held the painting up and squinted at it. Better, she said. Much better, Logan agreed, and meant it. Yum. They met at a coffee shop across town. Avery's suggestion, which Logan understood without her explaining it. Neutral territory. Not Sterling dynamics, not his neighborhood. Somewhere in between where neither of them was on home ground. He got there at 9:53. She was already there, which surprised him slightly. He'd expected someone with her schedule to arrive exactly on time or a few minutes after. She was at a corner table with a cup in front of her and a laptop open and a look on her face that he recognized from the day before. Not distress exactly, but the expression of someone who has been sitting with something heavy and is not quite sure how to set it down. She'd traded the blazer for a dark sweater, which made her look slightly less like someone from the 5th floor and slightly more like a regular person in a coffee shop. The jacket he'd lent her was over the back of the chair. She'd brought it. He sat down. Thanks for coming, she said. Sure. He flagged the server, ordered a black coffee, and turned back to her. What did you find? She turned the laptop to face him. She'd built a comparison chart. Clean, organized, the kind of thing that came naturally to someone who thought in data. On the left, the summary report Victor had given her. On the right, the raw system logs. 5 employee names, Logan's among them. The gap between the 2 columns was substantial enough that it wasn't explainable as rounding error or system glitch. Logan looked at it carefully. He'd been a logistics officer long enough to read data the way some people read text, fast, and with attention to what wasn't there as much as what was. These other 4 people, he said, same division as me? All in logistics and operations, all mid-level supervisors and coordinators. She pulled the laptop back, scrolled to a second page. I cross-referenced against the restructuring proposal Victor presented in the Q3 budget meeting. The positions he's flagging for elimination match almost exactly with the names here. The consolidation he's proposing would cut 6 roles and fold their responsibilities into a new oversight structure that would run through his office. Logan was quiet for a moment. And the financial angle? That's where I'm still working, Avery said. I don't have enough yet, but the restructuring proposal includes a budget reallocation from the logistics division to operational infrastructure. That's about $1.2 million over 18 months. The vendor contracts in that allocation are... She paused. I need someone outside the company to look at the vendor relationships before I can say anything definitive. But 2 of the 3 major vendors on that list are registered in the last 14 months. One of them at an address that doesn't appear to have any physical presence. Logan picked up his coffee and sat back. Victor Langley had been with Sterling Dynamics for 11 years. Logan had met him twice, maybe 3 times. The kind of executive who operated above the floor level, who sent directives through managers rather than walking the warehouse. He'd seemed, in those brief interactions, like someone who understood the machinery well and had very clear opinions about how it should run. Logan had taken that as competence. Now he was revising that read. "You're describing fraud," Logan said. "I'm describing data that looks like it might be pointing toward fraud," Avery said. "There's a difference." "Is there an attorney you trust outside the company?" "Dale Briggs. He's handled corporate work for us since my father started the company." She paused. "He's the one person I'm sure isn't connected to Victor in any way." "Talk to him before you do anything else inside the company," Logan said. "Don't pull any more records through internal channels until you've talked to him. If Victor has access to the audit trail, he could see what I'm pulling." "Right." Avery closed the laptop. She sat back, cupped both hands around her coffee, and looked at him with an expression he hadn't seen on her before. Not the hypervigilance of the conference room, not the careful neutrality she'd maintained in the truck. Something more honest than either. A look that acknowledged she was sitting across from someone whose judgment she'd ignored 2 days ago, and who was now the person she was asking for help. "Why are you helping me?" she said. It wasn't a defensive question. It was a real one. Logan thought about how to answer that. He considered a few versions of it. The pragmatic one, the one about self-interest, the one about wanting his record cleared. All of those were true enough, but they weren't quite the complete answer. "Because the problem you have is real," he said finally. "And because if someone in that building is doing what it looks like they're doing, there are 4 other people whose records got altered. They don't know yet." Avery looked at him. That's not why I expected," she said. "I know." He set his cup down. "You expected me to be angling for something." "Maybe." "I am," he said. "I want my record cleared. I want it documented that I was terminated on false information. That matters to me practically, for references, for the job search." He said this without apology, just factually. "But that's a separate thing from what you should do next. And what you should do next is call Briggs today." She held his gaze for a moment. Then she nodded, once. The small, decisive nod of someone who has made up their mind about something. "Okay," she said. She looked down at the jacket on the chair, then back at him. "Do you actually want this back?" "No," he said. "I told you, keep it." Something crossed her face. Not quite a smile, but the thing that happens just before one when you're too tired and too tangled up in something to let the smile fully form. She put her hand on the jacket, briefly, like anchoring it. "I'll call Briggs this afternoon," she said. "Good." Logan finished his coffee. He put on his own jacket, a different one, thicker, better suited to the October chill, and stood up. "Avery," he said. She looked up. "Whatever this turns into, handle it the right way, not the fast way." He said it without lecture in his voice, just the particular directness of someone who has seen what happens when people in positions of authority move fast because they're embarrassed about being wrong. The fast way usually breaks more than it fixes. She looked at him for a moment. "Is that from the army?" "From experience," he said. He left her in the coffee shop with the laptop and the jacket and the particular hard work of dismantling something you'd trusted without questioning. He spent the rest of Thursday and most of Friday in a kind of suspended state that he knew from before, the waiting period after you've done what you can and before anything resolves. He submitted 2 more applications. He had the Thursday callback, which went well enough that they'd asked him to come in for an in-person the following week. He fixed a leak under the kitchen sink that had been minor but persistent. He helped Sophie with a geography worksheet about the Great Lakes. He made dinner, cleaned up, put Sophie to bed. He did not think too much about Avery Sterling. That was a choice, not an accident. He was a practical person by nature and by necessity, and getting invested in someone else's internal investigation, especially one where the outcome affected him directly, but where he had no control over any of the variables, was not a productive use of energy. He'd said what he could say. She had the data. The rest was hers. But on Friday evening, after Sophie was asleep, he sat in the kitchen with a glass of water and found himself thinking about the rainstorm. Not about the conversation exactly, but about the particular quiet of the truck cab, the rain on the roof, Sophie asleep in the back. The way Avery Sterling had looked when she saw his daughter. That brief, unguarded moment when the CEO posture dropped completely. The way her voice went softer without her appearing to decide to make it softer. He thought about what she'd said. I'm beginning to wonder. He'd been in enough rooms where people in authority were faced with evidence that they'd made a wrong call to understand how rare it was for the wondering to come that quickly. Most people, not bad people, just people, had a self-protective delay built in. The wondering came after the defensiveness, after the justification, sometimes long after. It didn't usually start in the truck on the same night. He didn't know what to do with that observation, so he left it alone. He drank his water, he washed the glass, he went to bed. Outside, the maple tree in the backyard stood in the dark, leaves mostly still, with the patience that young trees seem to have. The particular stillness of something that is growing without making noise about it. He didn't know that Friday night, that by Monday morning, Avery Sterling would be sitting in Dale Briggs's office with a printed report and a data export and a question that was about to become a much larger problem for a man who had spent 11 years making himself indispensable. He didn't know, and he didn't let himself guess. He just went to sleep. Dale Briggs had an office that looked like it hadn't been significantly reorganized since 1997, which was either a sign of a man who didn't care about appearances or a man who had been too busy to deal with it. Avery suspected both were true. The walls were lined with actual physical bookshelves, actual physical books on them, and the desk was a wide mahogany thing that had probably belonged to someone before Dale and would probably belong to someone after. He was 68, compact, with white hair cut short, and the particular stillness of a man who had spent 4 decades listening carefully to people in rooms exactly like this one. He let Avery talk for 22 minutes without interrupting her. She'd timed it afterward, not on purpose, but because she'd glanced at the clock when she started and glanced at it again when he finally spoke, and the gap between those 2 moments was 22 minutes. She'd walked him through everything. The original report, the raw logs, the discrepancies, the restructuring proposal, the vendor registrations, the shell address. She put the printed comparison charts on his desk, and he'd looked at each one briefly and set them in a neat pile to his left without commenting. When she finished, he said, "How long have you had this?" "I started pulling the data Tuesday morning." "And you haven't discussed it with anyone inside the company?" "No, you're the first." Dale looked at the pile of papers. He had a coffee mug on his desk that said "World's Okayest Lawyer" in block letters, which she had never asked him about and he had never explained. "Good," he said. "That's the right call." "I wanted to make sure I understood what I was looking at before I brought it to you," Avery said. "I didn't want to come in here with a theory." "What you have isn't a theory," Dale said. "It's a pattern. The theory is the explanation for the pattern, and you don't have the complete explanation yet." He picked up the vendor registration page and looked at it more carefully. "This address, you ran it?" "Google Maps shows a parking structure." "Right." He set it down. "You're going to need a forensic accountant. Someone I choose, not someone who has any relationship to Victor or to anyone Victor knows. That's the first step." He looked at her. "This is going to take time, Avery. You do this right. It takes longer than you want it to. You do it fast because you're angry and you lose the thread." "I know." "Do you?" He said it without sharpness, just the straight question. "I fired someone on the basis of this data," she said. "I know I need to move carefully because I need what I build to hold up, but I also need to move because there are 5 people whose employment records are wrong, and one of them is already out of a job." Dale looked at her for a long moment. "Logan Mercer," he said. She hadn't mentioned the name. She'd used generic references, terminated employee, logistics coordinator, in her summary. "You know him?" she said. "I know of him," Dale said. "I know his father-in-law. Raymond Holt, retired, lives out past Millbrook now. His daughter Claire was married to Logan Mercer." A pause. "Claire passed a few years back. Ovarian cancer, I think. Logan raised the girl alone after that. Avery sat very still. Raymond talks about him, Dale said. Doesn't talk about much else these days, if I'm honest. Says the man's the most decent human being he's ever known, and Raymond Holt is not someone who gives out that kind of opinion for free. He picked up his coffee mug. You fired the man his late wife married, and he hasn't called me. So either he doesn't know I exist, or he's not the litigious type. He's not, Avery said. He accepted it without arguing. Dale set the mug down. Of course he did, he said, not unkindly. That's exactly what he'd do. She drove back to the office with her hands tight on the wheel and Dale's instruction list on the seat beside her. Forensic accountant, no internal disclosure until she had the full financial picture, documentation of every step she'd taken since Tuesday, and a call with Dale on Thursday to review what the accountant turned up. She parked in the executive deck and sat in the car for a few minutes. She thought about what Dale had said. His daughter Claire was married to Logan Mercer. Logan raised the girl alone after that. She knew Sophie's name. She'd heard Logan say it in the truck. Sophie, stomachache, too many birthday cupcakes. She'd seen her curled on the blanket in the back seat, one arm tucked under her cheek, completely trusting in the particular way of children who have a parent they rely on completely. She thought about what that meant, really meant, in the daily practical weight of it. Not the abstract idea of single parenthood, but the concrete fact of it. One parent, one income, one person who had to be at the school, breakfast, and at the office, and at the pediatrician, and at the pickup gate, and functioning and present through all of it, every day, with nothing to fall back on if he came up short. And she'd fired him. On data that was wrong, on a report she hadn't verified, because Victor Langley had put a folder on her desk and she'd been in a week where she was already feeling the specific pressure of a CEO who isn't sure she's enough, and the folder had given her something clear to act on, and she'd acted. She picked up her phone and almost called Logan. Stopped. She had nothing new to tell him yet. Calling him now would be about her discomfort, not about his situation. She put the phone down, got out of the car, and went back to work. Dale Briggs called her on Wednesday afternoon. She'd been expecting Thursday. She answered on the second ring. Raymond Holt called me this morning, Dale said, without preamble. Apparently someone reached out to him, looking for character references for Logan. Raymond mentioned to this person, I don't know who, that I was handling some of Logan's business affairs, which is an overstatement since I've never represented Logan directly, but Raymond is 81 and takes liberties. Okay, Avery said carefully. The person who called Raymond Holt was a retired Army general named Frank Calloway, Dale said. You know that name. She didn't. General Calloway was Logan's commanding officer for 2 years. Logan served as a logistics officer. Army, 8 years. Honorable discharge. Calloway retired with 3 stars and apparently has spent the last 6 years consulting for defense contractors and occasionally calling in favors for men he served with. He contacted Raymond looking for Logan's current situation, and Raymond told him what he knew, which apparently included the termination. Avery was quiet. Calloway called me at 8 this morning, Dale said. He's coming in tomorrow. He wanted to go on record with Logan's service history and his character assessment, unprompted, on his own time. He said, and I'm quoting directly here, I've worked with a lot of people in 40 years, and Logan Mercer is the kind of man you build organizations around. Whatever happened to him, he didn't deserve it. Avery had a pen in her hand. She'd been taking notes on something else before Dale called. She realized she hadn't written anything since he'd started talking. That doesn't change the legal picture, Dale said, but it matters for how we document the wrongful termination case, if it comes to that, and it matters to me that you understand who you let get caught in this. I understand, she said. Do you want to sit in when Calloway comes in tomorrow? She thought about it. Yes, she said. General Frank Calloway was 64, built like someone who'd spent 4 decades in physical environments that demanded it, and had the kind of bearing that didn't require rank insignia to communicate that he was accustomed to having rooms pay attention when he spoke. He wasn't loud. He didn't perform authority. He just occupied space in a way that made other people's postures adjust slightly without their realizing it. He shook Dale's hand, shook Avery's, sat down, and looked at her across the conference table with eyes that were assessing without being unkind. Thank you for coming, Avery said. I'm not doing this for you, Calloway said, simply, not hostilely. I'm doing this because Logan Mercer won't do it for himself, and someone should. I understand. Good. He folded his hands on the table. He hadn't brought papers or a folder. He apparently just had himself. Ask what you need to ask. Avery glanced at Dale, who nodded slightly. Tell me about his service record, she said. Calloway talked for 35 minutes. He was specific and chronological and unsentimental about it, which somehow made it more powerful than if he'd been trying to sell her on something. Logan Mercer had served 8 years as an Army logistics officer, attaining the rank of captain. He'd managed supply chains across 2 overseas assignments, including a particularly complex 18-month operation in which his division had maintained delivery reliability above 92% under conditions that regularly compromised other units. He'd been decorated twice. He'd been offered a promotion that would have kept him in uniform for another decade. He turned it down, Calloway said. His wife was sick. He didn't discuss it at length, that wasn't his way. But when he told me he was leaving, he was direct about it. He had a family that needed him present, not deployed. He paused. I've given that kind of speech to officers who were giving up significant careers, and usually there's something in their face, not regret exactly, but the awareness of the cost. Logan Mercer looked clear-eyed. That stuck with me. Avery had stopped taking notes. After Claire passed, Calloway continued, I checked in a few times. Not formally, just I made a point of it. He was working, raising Sophie, not asking for anything. I offered to make some calls on his behalf for a senior role at one of the defense contractors I consult for. He thanked me and said he had something he was building toward, and he preferred to build it himself. Calloway looked at Avery directly. That's who you fired. The room was quiet. I know, Avery said. I'm not saying this to make you feel worse than you already do, Calloway said. I'm saying it because whoever put bad data in front of you wanted a specific result, and the result they engineered had a real cost to a real person. That cost should be documented and named and addressed, not managed around. It will be, Avery said. That's what we're working toward. Calloway looked at her for a long moment, with the expression of someone who is deciding whether they believe what they're hearing. All right, he said. The forensic accountant Dale had retained was a woman named Susan Park, who operated out of a deliberately unremarkable office and had spent 15 years untangling financial structures that people had built specifically to resist untangling. She was thorough, she was unhurried, and she sent Avery her preliminary findings on Friday morning in a 9-page document that was dense with figures and cross-references and written in the particular flat language of someone who wanted the facts to do all the talking. Avery read it at her desk with the door closed and her phone on Do Not Disturb. The picture that emerged was not complicated once you had the right pieces. Victor Langley had, over the preceding 14 months, established a consulting arrangement with 2 vendors, both registered within the last 18 months, both with minimal operational footprint, that were positioned to receive the majority of the budget reallocation from the Q3 restructuring proposal. The arrangement was obscured through a secondary LLC that wasn't registered to Victor's name directly, but to a name that, cross-referenced through state business records, traced back to Victor's brother-in-law. The logistics division restructuring, the headcount reduction, the role consolidation, the elimination of the mid-level positions served 2 functions. It reduced the number of people who would be in a position to notice or question the new vendor relationships, and it created a justification for the budget reallocation that would read, in any normal audit, as operational efficiency improvement. The attendance data manipulation was the mechanism that made the headcount reduction defensible. You couldn't eliminate roles and terminate experienced employees without cause and expect it to hold up. But if those employees had documented attendance violations, if the performance record was there in black and white before the reduction was announced, you could make the numbers tell whatever story you needed them to tell. Logan Mercer had been, as far as Avery could determine from the pattern of termination Susan had identified, the first. Likely a test of the mechanism. Likely chosen because he was mid-tier, effective, not highly visible at the executive level, and, she thought of Calloway's words, the kind of person who wouldn't immediately make noise. She sat back in her chair. She thought about the morning in Conference Room B, the way Logan had looked when she read the decision. Not shattered, not furious, just very still, with something going quiet behind his eyes. The way he'd said okay and she'd thought it meant he was accepting it, and only later, in pieces, understood that what it actually meant was that he was choosing not to fight in a room where fighting would cost him more than it gained. She thought about Victor Langley at the budget meeting, smooth and thorough, telling her clean breaks the right call. She pressed both palms flat on the desk and breathed. Then she called Dale. "I have Susan's preliminary report," she said. "So do I," Dale said. "She sent it to both of us simultaneously." "Then you've read it." "Just finished." A pause. "You're ready to move?" "Tell me the right order," Avery said. Dale walked her through it. Board chair first, this Marcus Webb, who had been on the Sterling Dynamics board for 9 years and who, Dale was confident, had no relationship with Victor's operation outside the normal governance structure. She would need to brief Marcus privately before any formal board action, because what she was bringing was serious enough that the board needed to understand its exposure before it went into a formal meeting. After Marcus, Dale would file the formal fraud documentation with the appropriate regulatory bodies in parallel with the board's action, so there was no gap in which Victor could move to cover his tracks or obscure the financial trail. "And Logan Mercer," Avery said. "Logan Mercer comes before the board meeting," Dale said. "You go to him directly, not through HR, not through a letter, you." "I was going to," she said. "I know." A pause. "Avery?" "Yeah." "You handled this right," Dale said. "Once you knew something was off, you handled it right. That matters." She didn't say anything for a moment. She wanted to say, "I should have handled it right before I fired him," but she knew Dale knew that, and there wasn't a version of saying it out loud that helped anything, so she didn't. "Call me after you talk to Marcus," Dale said. She called Marcus Webb. Marcus was 62 and had the particular temperament of someone who had served on enough boards to be unsurprisable. He listened to Avery with the same quiet attention Dale had. It seemed to be a quality that certain older men who had handled serious things for a long time developed, this capacity for stillness when the news was bad. He asked 3 precise questions. He said he'd need 24 hours to review the documentation she sent over. He called back in 19. "The board will convene Friday," he said. "Extraordinary session. I'll handle the notifications." A pause. "Victor will need to be present." "I know," Avery said. "He doesn't know what the session is about." "No." "Good." Another pause. "Your father would have handled this exactly this way," Marcus said. "I want you to know that." Avery was quiet for a moment. She wasn't sure what to do with that, whether it helped or just added weight to what she was already carrying. "Thank you, Marcus," she said. She scheduled the board session for Friday at 10. She confirmed with Dale. She confirmed with Susan Park that the full financial documentation would be ready by Thursday evening. Then she sat in her office on Tuesday afternoon with 3 days between her and the board meeting, and she looked at the address she'd written on a sticky note that morning. Logan's home address from his personnel file, the same file that contained his real attendance records and his correct performance history and everything else that had been there all along, accurate and complete, in a system that someone had learned to write around without touching the underlying data. She was going to go to him. Before the board meeting, before any of this became official, before his name was cleared on paper. She was going to go to his house and look him in the face and tell him herself. She wasn't looking forward to it. She also understood, in some clear-eyed part of herself, that not looking forward to something you owe someone is not a reason to delay it. She wrote Thursday next to the address on the sticky note. 3 days. She had work to do before then. On Wednesday evening, Logan got a call back from the Hartford freight contact. Not the tentative maybe October possibility he'd been nursing. A real opening, director of regional logistics, reporting directly to the VP of operations. The pay was better than Sterling Dynamics. The commute was manageable. The contact said he'd been asked specifically by the VP to reach out to Logan after seeing his resume, which meant someone had looked at his numbers and done the math. He said he was interested, asked them to send the formal job description, and after he hung up, he sat at the kitchen table for a moment with the specific feeling of a situation shifting slightly underfoot. He told Sophie at dinner that there was a good job possibility, which she responded to by asking if Hartford had a good school system, which he hadn't been expecting from an 8-year-old, but probably should have been by now. "We're not moving anywhere yet," he said. "It's a conversation." "But maybe?" "Maybe," he said. "I don't know yet." Sophie stabbed a piece of broccoli, considered it, and ate it with the resigned expression of someone honoring a prior agreement. "I like my school," she said. "I know you do." "I like Mrs. Galvez." "She's great," he agreed. "And my class has the gecko," Sophie said. "Mr. Fernandez, he's been there since 3rd grade. Logan looked at his daughter. "The gecko's named Mr. Fernandez?" "Yes." She said it like this was not worth explaining. "The teacher's also named Fernandez," Logan said. "I know," Sophie said. "It was before Mr. Fernandez started teaching there. The gecko was first." He didn't push the Hartford conversation further. He filed the information. Real opening, good numbers, ask for the job description, and let it sit in the back of his mind where practical possibilities lived, while the front of his mind was occupied with what it was occupied with. He washed the dishes. He helped Sophie with the spelling worksheet. He checked his email and found the Hartford job description in his inbox and read it twice before he put the phone away. He did not know that 2 days later, Avery Sterling would be standing on his front porch with her hands in her jacket pockets. His jacket, the worn canvas one with the elbows, and a look on her face that had nothing managed about it. He did not know what she was going to say when he opened the door, or what he was going to feel when he heard it, or what it would mean to sit with her at his kitchen table under the plain overhead light and talk about things that had gone wrong and what came next. He just did the dishes and helped with the spelling and put his daughter to bed, and the maple tree stood in the October dark in the backyard, growing its quiet increment towards spring. She drove herself. No driver, no assistant, no buffer of any kind, just Avery in her own car on a Thursday morning, following the GPS to a street in a part of the city she didn't know well, where the houses were close together and the yards were small and the maple trees along the sidewalk were turning in the October cold. She'd written down what she wanted to say, not a script. She'd tried that the night before, and it had come out sounding like a press release, which was exactly the wrong register for a man who spoke in plain sentences and expected the same back. She'd thrown it away and spent an hour sitting on her couch trying to find the honest version, the one that didn't lead with self-defense or legalese. And when she'd finally found it, she hadn't written it down because it was the kind of thing you either said or you didn't. She found the house, a small 2-story white with gray trim, a porch with 2 steps up, a side yard with a young maple that hadn't fully turned yet, a truck in the driveway, the same truck, the one she'd sat in on the shoulder of Route 9 while the rain came down and Logan handed her a jacket without being asked. She sat in her car for about 45 seconds. Then she got out. The porch steps had a slight creak on the left side. She rang the bell and heard it through the door. A plain 2-note sound, nothing fancy. Footsteps on a wood floor. The door opened. Logan looked at her the way he looked at most things, steadily, without a lot of initial expression, taking in information before deciding what to do with it. He had a dish towel over one shoulder, which told her she'd interrupted something. He was in jeans and a gray long-sleeve shirt, and he looked different here than he'd looked in the conference room or the coffee shop. More solid, somehow. Like this was the context in which he made the most sense. "Avery," he said. Not surprised, not cold, just her name, acknowledging her presence. "I should have called," she said. "I didn't want to call." He looked at her for a moment, then he stepped back from the door. "Come in," he said. The house was exactly what she'd have expected if she'd thought about it, which she hadn't, which meant she was taking it in now, and it was doing something to her chest she hadn't prepared for. It was a house that had been lived in, hard and lovingly, by people who didn't have money to spare but had time and care. The furniture was mismatched in the way of things collected gradually rather than purchased together. There were drawings on the refrigerator held up with magnets. She counted 7 before she looked away. A pair of small sneakers by the back door with the laces still half-tied from the last time they'd been pulled off in a hurry. A stack of library books on the counter with a due date reminder. Sticky note in handwriting that was too small and precise to be Sophie's. Sophie's room was visible at the top of the stairs. A door with a paper sign on it in marker that read, "Knock first, this means you." School day, Avery registered. Sophie wasn't home. Logan had already moved back to the kitchen when she came in, and she followed him there because it seemed like where the conversation was going to happen. He poured 2 cups of coffee without asking, set one on the table, and pulled out a chair for himself at the far side. She sat down across from him, which felt like the appropriate geography. The same distance as the coffee shop, the same facing each other arrangement, but different because this was his table, and she was the one who had come to it. She put her hands around the coffee mug. "I wanted to come in person," she said. "Not send a letter, not have HR contact you. Me." "Okay," Logan said. "I found what I needed to find. The attendance data in the report I was given was fabricated. Your actual record has 3 late arrivals, all flagged in advance, all with documented exceptions. 2 early departures, both manager approved. Everything else in your file is clean." She stopped, kept going. "My COO, Victor Langley, altered the system report to manufacture grounds for your termination. He did the same thing to 4 other employees in the logistics and operations division. All of them were targeted as part of a restructuring plan he designed to benefit himself financially. There are vendor relationships and a budget reallocation scheme that our forensic accountant has now fully documented." Logan had both hands on his own mug. He was watching her, listening, not interrupting. "I'm presenting the evidence to the board tomorrow morning," Avery said. "Dale Briggs is our corporate attorney. He's been guiding this since Monday. The fraud documentation has already been filed with the appropriate regulatory bodies. Victor will be removed from the company at the board meeting." Logan was quiet. "Your termination was wrongful," she said. "It's being formally reversed. The legal documentation will make clear that you were terminated on fabricated grounds, that your record with the company is clear and accurate, and that you're entitled to back pay for the period of unemployment. Dale's office will contact you separately about the specifics." She stopped again. Then, "I'm sorry. I'm telling you this as directly as I can because you deserve directness. I was given bad information and I didn't question it the way I should have. I made a decision about your livelihood and your family's stability on the basis of a report I should have verified, and I didn't." She looked at him. "That's on me. Not on the data, not on Victor. On me. I'm sorry." The kitchen was quiet. Outside, a car went by. The refrigerator made a small mechanical sound. Logan looked at his coffee mug for a moment. Then he looked at her. "You started questioning it the same day," he said. "That's not—" "I know it's not an excuse," he said. "I'm not offering it as one. I'm just noting it as a fact." He picked up his mug, set it down without drinking. "I've worked for people who were given wrong information and spent 6 months refusing to look at it because they didn't want to be wrong. You started pulling records the next morning. That's not nothing. It's not enough either." "No," he agreed. "It's not. But it's what happened." She hadn't expected him to offer that. She'd come prepared for anger, or the cold politeness of someone who was keeping their anger managed. She hadn't prepared for him to acknowledge what she'd done right in the middle of acknowledging what she'd done wrong, with the same flat, even tone he used for everything, like accuracy mattered more to him than making her feel the full weight of it. It made her feel the full weight of it more, not less. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "You can ask. Is there anything you need right now? Before the formal paperwork comes through? Financially, I mean. I know how timelines work in legal processes, and I know you have Sophie—" "We're okay," Logan said. "Logan, I mean it." He didn't say it defensively. "We're tight, but we're okay. I have a job interview next week. Good position, the numbers are right. I've been at lean stretches before." He looked at her. "I don't need an advance or a bridge arrangement. I appreciate that you're asking, but I need the formal process to go through the way it should, not as a favor." Avery nodded. She understood that. "There is something," he said. "Tell me." "The 4 other people. In logistics. They don't know their records were altered." "They're being notified today," Avery said. "Dale's office is contacting each of them individually. None of them were terminated. Victor was building the case against them gradually, the way he built it against you. They still have their jobs. Their records will be formally corrected." She paused. "You were first." I think you were first because he needed to know the mechanism worked. Logan took that in. He didn't say anything about it for a moment. One of them is a woman named Patricia Cho, he said. She's been there longer than me, 7 years. She's good at her job. Whatever you build after this, she should be in the conversation. Avery looked at him. I'll make sure of it. He nodded once. They sat for a moment in the quiet kitchen. The refrigerator drawings were at the edge of Avery's vision. A horse, she could now see, and what looked like a map of something, and the orange fire or fox painting she recognized from Sophie's description. She fixed the bottom part, Avery said without thinking. Logan looked at her. What? The orange painting. She nodded toward the refrigerator. The bottom part. She said it looked like a hat. He turned to look at the painting, and something shifted in his face. Not a full smile, but the thing that happens in the muscles around a person's eyes when they're fighting one without completely winning. She told you about that? In the truck, when she woke up briefly. Avery paused. She didn't really wake up. I don't think she knew I was there. Logan looked at the painting for another moment, then back at Avery. She knew you were there, he said quietly. She asked me about you the next morning. Not by name. She didn't know your name. She asked about the woman in the rain. Avery didn't say anything. I told her you were someone I'd met through work, Logan said, which was true enough. What did she say? She said your hair was pretty. He said it simply, without apparent intention to land it anywhere. Then she asked for pancakes. Avery looked down at her coffee mug. She was aware, in a way she hadn't been 2 minutes ago, of how her hands looked around the mug, slightly too tight, the tension she'd been carrying all morning still in her fingers. She loosened her grip deliberately. I should let you get on with your day, she said. You don't have to rush, Logan said. She looked up. He was looking at her with that steady quality that was starting to be something she could read better than she initially could. Not warmth exactly, not guardedness exactly, but the expression of someone who is genuinely present in a conversation and not managing their way through it. I have the board meeting tomorrow, she said. I should prepare. You're probably already prepared, he said. I have been since Wednesday, she admitted. Something in the corner of his mouth moved. Then sit down for a minute, drink the coffee. She sat down. She drank the coffee. It was quiet in the kitchen in a way that wasn't uncomfortable, which surprised her, because she'd come here expecting this to be the hardest 20 minutes she'd had in a month, and it had been hard, but the hard part was over, and what remained was just two people sitting at a table with their coffee and the drawings on the refrigerator and the October light coming through the window over the sink. How long have you been in this house? She said. 2.5 years. We moved here after... He paused. After Claire. The old apartment had too much of her in it in a way that wasn't manageable anymore. This was new enough that Sophie could start to have her own memories in it. Avery looked at the refrigerator drawings again. 7 distinct pieces of paper, 7 different moments. She's good, Avery said. The drawings. She doesn't want to be an artist, Logan said. She wants to be a marine biologist or a civil engineer, or a marine biologist who also does civil engineering, which she apparently thinks is a possible career path. It could be, Avery said. That's what I told her. He picked up his mug. She's going through a phase where she wants to understand how things are built. Bridges, mostly. She makes me explain bridge design on road trips. And do you know bridge design? I've learned a lot of bridge design in the last 4 months, he said. Avery felt something loosen in her chest, something that had been tight since the conference room, maybe longer, maybe since her father died and she inherited his company and started carrying the particular weight of someone who isn't sure they're equal to what's been handed to them. She felt it loosen slightly, the way a knot goes when you find the right place to pull. She finished her coffee. She put the mug down and picked up her bag. Logan, she said. He looked at her. Thank you for letting me come here. She said it meaning it, and it was a different kind of gratitude from the truck, from the coffee shop. This one had more of her actual self in it. I know you didn't have to. You came to do the right thing, he said. That's all it was. She stood. He walked her to the door. On the porch, she paused and turned. The board meeting is at 10 tomorrow morning, she said. Dale will reach out to you tomorrow afternoon when it's done. He nodded. She walked to her car. At the end of the front walk, she turned back, some impulse she didn't fully plan, and Logan was still standing in the doorway with the dish towel still over one shoulder and the morning light on his face, watching her go with the particular stillness that was just the way he was in the world. She got in the car and drove to work. The board meeting was at 10 and it ran until 12:47. Avery had prepared for resistance. She'd prepared for Victor to be smooth, to have an explanation, to deploy the 11 years of institutional knowledge and the carefully curated confidence that had made him a fixture of the company since before she arrived. She'd prepared for the board to be uncertain, for Marcus to have to work the room, for the kind of prolonged deliberation that large decisions with large consequences required. Victor Langley lasted about 20 minutes. Susan Park's financial documentation was thorough in the way that financial documentation is only thorough when someone has been doing this for 15 years and has seen every version of how men like Victor structure their arrangements. The Shell LLC, the brother-in-law's name, the vendor addresses, the budget allocation timeline, laid out in sequence, it was not ambiguous. It was the work of someone who had been careful, but careful in the way that assumes no one will look closely, which is a different thing from careful in the way that survives scrutiny. Victor said, in order, that the vendor relationships were standard consulting arrangements, that the LLC was a legal structure with a legitimate purpose, that the attendance data discrepancies were likely a system error, and that he would be happy to provide further documentation at a later meeting. Marcus Webb, who had served on 3 other boards and had seen things that would have made Victor Langley look like amateur hour, looked at him across the conference table and said, with the particular flatness of a man who is not angry so much as finished, "Victor, there are 12 people in this room and we've all read Susan Park's report. I'd suggest you stop." Victor stopped. The board voted, 7-2, with 2 abstentions. Victor Langley was removed from his position as COO, effective immediately. The matter had been referred to the relevant authorities, which meant it was now in a space that operated outside of what the board could manage further. Security was called, not dramatically, not with any particular theater, and Victor Langley left the Sterling Dynamics building for the last time at 12:51 p.m., carrying a cardboard box and being walked to the elevator by 2 men who were doing their jobs without visible emotion. Avery stood at the window in the conference room after the board members had filed out and watched the black car that had been called for Victor pull away from the building. Marcus came to stand beside her. "You handled it right," he said. The same thing Dale had said. "You said that already," she said. "I'll keep saying it until you believe it." She looked at him sideways. Marcus Webb had the face of a man who had been through enough that he no longer wasted expressions on things that didn't warrant them. He was looking at her with something plain and clear that she recognized after a moment as respect. Not the professional variety, not the kind extended to titles and positions, but the actual kind. "Your father would have been proud of you today," Marcus said. She looked back out the window. The parking lot was ordinary in the noon light, cars and concrete and nothing remarkable about any of it. "I keep hearing that this week," she said, "because it keeps being true." He put a hand briefly on her shoulder, the gesture of someone who is not naturally demonstrative and is making an effort. "Call me if you need anything for the follow-through." He left. She stood at the window a while longer. Then she called Dale. "It's done," she said. "Good," Dale said. "I'll reach out to Mercer this afternoon. And Avery, the formal reinstatement paperwork will be ready by end of day. Director of Operations. The promotion is yours to make, and given what's been documented, the board will support it." Director of Operations. It was 2 levels above Logan's previous role, a jump that was either a genuine reflection of what his file showed he was capable of, or optics depending on how you looked at it. She'd thought about this for 2 days. She'd thought about whether it looked like she was trying to buy something, whether it diminished rather than honored what had happened. She talked to Patricia Cho, as Logan had suggested, and Patricia, who turned out to be exactly as sharp and direct as Logan's brief endorsement had suggested, had said without any softening, "If his record supports it, give him the role. Don't under-promotion someone because you're worried about appearances. That's another kind of getting it wrong." "The file supports it," Avery told Dale. "Make it Director of Operations. But Logan got the call from Dale Briggs at 4:18 p.m. He was at the kitchen table again, same as most afternoons, though this time with the Hartford job description open on his laptop alongside a draft response email he'd been composing since morning. He hadn't sent it yet. He'd been waiting, without deciding he was waiting, for the afternoon call. Dale walked him through it methodically. Formal reversal of termination, corrected personnel record, back pay for the period, and then the offer. Director of Operations, reporting to the CEO, a salary he'd have to read twice to confirm he'd heard right. He was quiet for a moment. "That's 2 levels up from where I was," he said. "It is," Dale said. "Ms. Sterling's decision. The file supports it. The actual file, the complete one, with the Army record and the full performance history and the numbers you put up in your time there." She made the call. Logan sat back. "You don't have to accept," Dale said. "The back pay and the corrected record stand regardless. The offer is separate." "I know," Logan said. "Do you want time?" "No," Logan said. He said it without drama, just the same flat certainty he brought to most things when he'd already figured out what the answer was. "I'll accept." He heard Dale make a note of something. "I'll have the paperwork to you by end of week. You'd start Monday, if that works." "Monday works," Logan said. He closed the Hartford draft email without sending it. He sat for a minute in the kitchen. The refrigerator drawings were in his peripheral vision, same as always. The maple outside the window was catching the late afternoon sun in a way that made the turning leaves look like they were lit from inside. He thought about Claire. He did this sometimes, not the sustained grief of the first year, which had been its own weather system entirely, but the briefer visits, the moments where he'd catch himself wanting to tell her something. She'd have had opinions about all of this. Claire had always had opinions, specific and unsentimental, and she'd usually been right, and she'd have told him to take the job and not make a production of it. He heard Sophie at the door at 3:58, Mrs. Galvez's car pulling up, the front door opening, the backpack hitting the floor with the particular thud it made when she'd had a full day, and wasn't thinking about the books in it. "Dad?" she called. "Kitchen," he called back. She appeared in the kitchen doorway, red-cheeked from the cold, hair coming loose from the braid she'd left with that morning. "Something smells good." "Chilly," he said. "Couple more hours." She climbed onto the chair across from him and looked at the laptop. "Did you get a job?" "I got my old job back," he said. "Better version of it." Sophie looked at him carefully, the way she did when she was processing something with more layers than the surface. "The same company?" "Yes." "The company that was wrong about you?" "Yes." She was quiet for a moment, picking at a loose thread on her sleeve. "Is that okay?" she said. Not asking whether it was professionally okay, but asking whether it was okay for him, the way 8-year-olds sometimes ask questions that cut straight to the thing adults spend 3 paragraphs circling. Logan thought about Conference Room B and the truck on Route 9, and a woman sitting at this table this morning with her hands too tight around her coffee mug, trying to find the honest version of an apology. "Yeah," he said. "I think it's okay." Sophie nodded slowly, still working the thread. "Is it the lady? The one from the rain?" He looked at his daughter. "What makes you ask that?" She shrugged, which meant she knew more than she was letting on. "Mrs. Galvez said sometimes it's good when the person who made a mistake is the one who fixes it." "Mrs. Galvez is smart," Logan said. "I know," Sophie said. "That's why I asked her." He almost laughed. It came out as something quieter, a breath, a loosening. He reached across the table and tugged her braid lightly, the way he'd done since she was small enough that the braid was barely the width of his thumb. "Chili's in 2 hours," he said. "Go do your homework." She slid off the chair, picked up her backpack, and went to the stairs. At the bottom step, she stopped and turned back. "Dad?" she said. "Yeah." "I'm glad you're not sad anymore." He watched her go up the stairs, her sneakers on each step, until he heard her door. The one with the knock first sign, open and close. He sat in the kitchen. The chili was on low. The maple outside was burning orange and gold in the October light. He had a job and a daughter and 2.5 years of a house that was becoming the right kind of full. He picked up his phone and sent one text to a number he'd decided without making a production of it, to keep in his contacts. Dale called. I accepted. Thank you for doing this right. The reply came 4 minutes later. I should have done it right the first time, but I'm glad we got here. He looked at it for a moment, then he put the phone face down and went to check on the chili. He showed up Monday morning at 7:58, not because he needed to prove anything about punctuality. The irony of that would have been too heavy to carry. But because 7:58 was when he'd always arrived, and there was something grounding about returning to his own rhythm rather than performing a version of himself for an audience. He took the stairs. He had a coffee from the place 2 blocks over that he'd started going to in his first week at Sterling Dynamics 3 years ago, before the company knew his name and when he was still figuring out which entrance was fastest from the parking deck. The logistics floor felt the same and didn't feel the same. Marcus, the floor supervisor, saw him from across the warehouse and stopped what he was doing and walked over at a pace that wasn't quite a jog, but was faster than his usual measured stride. He stuck out his hand before he was fully there. About time, Marcus said. Good to be back, Logan said, which was true in the compressed way that large feelings sometimes compressed into small sentences. His desk had been reassigned in his absence, occupied now by a temp whose things had been quietly moved, and the new office, director of operations, was on the 3rd floor. A corner room, not large, with a window that looked out over the loading dock on one side and the east parking lot on the other. Utilitarian views. He liked them better than the 5th floor window that looked over the manicured front approach, which had always struck him as the view of a company performing itself. There was a folder on the desk, a note on top in Avery's handwriting. He recognized it from the sticky note she'd written when they met at the coffee shop, the address and the time, practical and clear. The note said, "Welcome back. The folder has the current operational priorities. I know you'll have questions. My door is open when you're ready." He read it twice, put it aside, and opened the folder. He had work to do. Yamt. The first weeks back were strange in the specific way that returning to something familiar from an unfamiliar angle is always strange. He knew the building, knew the systems, knew most of the people, but the role was different, broader, more exposure to the executive level, more decisions that landed on his desk requiring sign-off rather than coordination. He was learning the scope of it in real time, which meant some days he was operating at full capacity, and some days he was aware, acutely, of the gap between where he was and where the role expected him to be. He didn't hide that from Avery. That was probably the first real surprise of the return. How quickly the dynamic between them stopped being the thing it had been and became something else. Not friendship, not yet, not exactly. More like a working relationship that had been stripped of the normal professional veneers by everything that had happened between them, so that what remained was unusually direct. She didn't manage around him. He didn't perform competence he didn't have. In their second week, she came to his office with a vendor contract she wanted his read on before she signed it. Not a delegation. She was asking his actual opinion. She sat down across from his desk with the contract and her own notes, and they went through it together for 40 minutes, and at the end she changed 2 terms based on things he'd flagged and didn't make a production of either the change or the acknowledgement. "That clause on exclusivity," she said, marking it. "You're right, that's a trap." "It happens gradually," he said. "You get comfortable with one vendor and stop building alternatives, and then the exclusivity clause is just a formality reflecting what's already true." She looked at him. "Is that logistics or something else?" He thought about it. "Both, probably." She almost smiled. That same almost. The one he'd started to recognize as her actual response when something landed before the CEO management caught up to it. She gathered the contract and stood. "Dinner with the operations team Thursday," she said. "Quarterly thing. You should be there." "I'll be there," he said. She was at the door, stopped. "How's Sophie?" It was the first time she'd asked directly, in those words, since the kitchen table. He'd mentioned Sophie in passing twice in operational conversations, and Avery had registered it without commenting, which he'd noticed because he noticed most things. "She's good," he said. "She's very interested in the suspension bridge I apparently have to explain before this Friday." "The suspension bridge?" "Third grade science project. She's building a model." He paused. She wants it structurally accurate. Of course she does. This time the almost smile made it all the way. Good luck with that. She left. He went back to work. But there was something in the exchange that sat with him after she was gone. Not the professional ease of it, which he'd expected to develop eventually, but the other part. The how's Sophie? The way she'd asked it like someone who actually wanted to know, not like a courtesy. He put it in the same place he'd been putting similar observations for 2 weeks and got on with his afternoon. Sophie built the bridge. It took 3 weekends and involved an amount of research that Logan found both impressive and faintly alarming for an 8-year-old, including a library book on bridge engineering she'd checked out herself and read with the focused determination she applied to things she'd decided were important. The model was made from balsa wood and string, and 2 small towers that she'd cut and sanded with his help on the porch on a cold Saturday afternoon, both of them in jackets with sawdust on their hands. The cables need to be equal tension, Sophie told him, adjusting a string with her tongue pressed to the corner of her mouth. Otherwise the deck sags. Where did you learn that? The book. She didn't look up. Also, you told me about tension and load when we were watching that documentary. He didn't remember the documentary specifically. He apparently talked about structural load distribution during documentaries. That tracked. It's good, Bug, he said. The deck's still a little uneven. She tilted her head, assessing. It looks level to me. It's not level to me. She made a small adjustment with 2 fingers. There. He looked at the bridge. 8 years old, and she'd built a model that would have made a decent classroom demonstration at twice the age. He wasn't sure where she was going to put all of it. The precision and the stubbornness and the refusal to accept good enough when she could see better. He was both proud of it and faintly worried about the world she'd eventually take it into, because the world had complicated feelings about people who saw the uneven deck when everyone else said it looked fine. It's great, he said. I know, she said, with the flat satisfaction of someone who has done what they set out to do. Can we get hot chocolate? It's 52 degrees. Dad? Yeah, he said. Let's get hot chocolate. The hot chocolate place had become a rhythm. Not every weekend, but often enough that the woman behind the counter knew their order before they got to the register and had started calling Sophie the engineer after overhearing bridge conversation number 3. Sophie tolerated this with the dignified acceptance of someone who has decided the nickname is accurate enough not to contest. They were there on the first Saturday of November, hands around their cups, Sophie drawing something on a napkin with a pen she'd produced from her jacket pocket, because she always had a pen. Is the lady from the rain coming to your work? Sophie said. Logan looked at her. She's my boss. She's been there. I know that. Sophie didn't look up from the napkin drawing. I mean, is she going to come to our house again? He was quiet for a moment. I don't know, he said. Why? Sophie shrugged, which was her tell, the shrug that meant she had an opinion she'd decided to hold lightly. She seemed nice when I saw her in the truck. You were asleep. I wasn't fully asleep. She added a line to whatever she was drawing. I heard her voice. It was quiet. A pause. Some people's voices are loud even when they're being quiet. Hers wasn't. Logan drank his coffee and didn't say anything. You could invite her to something, Sophie said, still focused on the napkin. Sophie. I'm just saying. I know what you're saying. She looked up at him then, and she had Claire's eyes and Claire's particular expression of someone who has already figured out the answer and is waiting for you to catch up, and it hit him the way it sometimes did. The particular quality of a wound that had healed but still registered pressure. Okay, she said, not pushing it. She went back to the napkin. He looked out the window at the November street, the leaves mostly down now, the trees showing their structure against the gray sky. He thought about what Sophie had said the week the settlement came through. I'm glad you're not sad anymore. He thought about the distinction he'd made for her. Sad is when something bad happened and you can't do much about it. Annoyed is when something bad happened and it wasn't fair and you know it. He had not been, he realized, fully honest with that definition. There was a third category he hadn't named. The one that wasn't sad and wasn't annoyed, but was the quiet, ongoing cost of going from a life with someone in it to a life without them, and carrying that absence forward into every small thing. The drawings on the refrigerator, the half-tied sneakers, the library books with his handwriting on the sticky note, as evidence of what he'd built in the space the loss had left. He'd been in that third category for 3 years, mostly. Functional. Present. Not sad exactly, but not sad either. He wasn't sure when that had started to shift. He suspected it had been gradual enough that he'd missed the moment. "What are you drawing?" he said. Sophie turned the napkin to face him. It was a bridge, recognizably, with careful attention to the cable lines. In the middle of the deck, small and precise, were 2 figures standing side by side. One tall, one small. "That's us," she said, pointed to a third figure at the far end of the deck, slightly apart but on the same bridge. "That's her." Logan looked at the napkin drawing. "Sophie," he said. "I'm not saying anything," she said, pulling the napkin back. "I'm just drawing." He didn't engineer it. He wanted to be clear about that, at least to himself. He didn't set anything up, didn't arrange the November morning when Avery happened to be working late on a Friday, and he was the last one on the 3rd floor finishing a vendor review, and she knocked on his open office door at 7:15 with her jacket on and her bag over her shoulder. "You're still here," she said. "You're still here," he said. "I had a board call that ran long." She looked at the papers on his desk. "The Meridian contract?" "Last section. I'll finish it Monday. Don't stay late for it. It can wait." She paused in the doorway. "Have you eaten?" He had not eaten. He'd been meaning to leave at 6, which meant Sophie was with Mrs. Galvez for another 2 hours, and there was no urgent reason to rush. "No," he said. "There's a place 2 blocks over that does a decent bowl of soup," Avery said. "If that's—" She stopped. Tried again. "I'm going there anyway. You could come if you haven't eaten." He looked at her for a moment. She was doing the thing she did when she was slightly outside her comfort zone. Her default efficiency went neutral, not cold, just careful, like she was monitoring herself. "Yeah," he said. "Give me 5 minutes." He filed the contract pages, shut down his computer, got his jacket. He met her at the elevator, and they walked the 2 blocks in the November cold without saying much, which turned out to be fine. The soup place was small and warm and not crowded on a Friday night. They got a corner booth, 2 bowls of something with white beans and escarole that turned out to be better than adequate, and the conversation moved the way conversations moved when 2 people have been talking about work for 6 weeks and are now, for the first time, not in the building where the work happens. She told him about her father. Not a lot. Not the grief version, just the company version, the way Robert Sterling had run Sterling Dynamics like it was a living thing rather than a financial instrument, the way he'd known the name of every driver in the distribution fleet and the name of every driver's kid if the driver had told him. She said it without sentimentality, more like someone describing a standard they were still figuring out how to meet. "He would have found out about Victor in 3 weeks," she said. "You found out in 1?" Logan said. "I found out in 1 because you were in a truck on Route 9. "You would have found it anyway," he said. "Eventually, the vendor structures weren't clean enough to hold long term." "Maybe." She was quiet for a moment. "But it would have been later, after more damage." "You can't run a company trying to prevent all the damage," he said. "You deal with what's in front of you when it gets there. Do that consistently enough and the pattern holds." She looked at him. "That sounds like logistics." "It sounds like life," he said. She was quiet for a moment, looking at her soup. Then, "Tell me about the Army." He told her, not the decorated version, not the version that ended up in Calloway's record, just the actual version, what the work looked like from inside it. The logistics of supply chains and environments where the consequences of getting it wrong were not delivery discrepancies, but people going without what they needed in places where that mattered. The way the Army had taught him to hold a wide view and a granular view at the same time, to see both the system and the individual component, to understand that the people operating at the granular level were the ones who actually knew where the system was failing. "That's why you noticed the Meridian exclusivity clause," she said. "That's part of it," he said. "And the other part?" "Claire was a contract attorney," he said. "She used to talk through her cases at the dinner table. I absorbed more than I probably was supposed to." He said Claire's name without bracing for it, which was different from a year ago when he'd had to consciously manage the moment. He noticed the difference. Filed it. Avery looked at him with a careful directness. What was she like? Most people didn't ask that. They asked how it happened, or how long ago, or how Sophie was doing, which were all variations of navigating around the fact of Claire rather than asking about Claire herself. Precise, he said. She had the most specific opinions of anyone I've ever known. About everything. Contracts, obviously, but also food and architecture and what made a story good or bad. She didn't give opinions for free. When she told you something, it was because she'd actually thought about it. He paused. Sophie has that. The specificity. I know, Avery said. The bridge deck. He looked at her. She told you about that? You did. In your office, the uneven deck. Avery smiled. The real one, not the almost, the one that changed her whole face. I've been thinking about that bridge ever since. Something settled in the room between them. Not a big thing, not dramatic, just the small shift that happens when two people who have been careful with each other stop being quite as careful. She wants to meet you, Logan said. Avery looked at him. Sophie? She told me I should invite you to something. He said it plainly. She called you the lady from the rain, said your voice was quiet. Avery was silent for a moment, and he watched something move across her face. Not the managed professional expression, not the careful neutral, but the actual version, the one that didn't always make it past the gate. Her eyes were doing something she probably didn't know they were doing. She said that? Avery said. She was drawing a bridge on a napkin at the time, Logan said. She put you on it. Avery looked down at the table. When she looked back up, she had most of it managed, but not all of it, and the part she hadn't managed was enough. Okay, she said. I'd like that. They walked back to the parking deck in the cold, their breath visible in the November air, and somewhere between the soup place and the elevator she bumped her shoulder into his arm once, briefly, not an accident, and he didn't make a thing of it, just absorbed the small fact of it and kept walking. She came on a Saturday in late November, not to anything planned or formal. Logan had mentioned they usually went to the farmer's market on Saturday mornings when the weather wasn't miserable, and she'd said that sounded good, and so she showed up at 9:15 in jeans and boots and a dark coat, and Sophie opened the door before Logan could get there. There was a moment, the two of them in the doorway, Sophie looking up at Avery with the assessing gray eyes, and Avery looking down with something that Logan, watching from the hallway, would later understand was a combination of nervousness and wanting very badly to get this right. Sophie said, "Your hair is different from the truck." Avery touched her hair, which was down. "Is it okay?" Sophie considered this with the seriousness it apparently warranted. "Yes," she said. Then, "I'm Sophie." "I know," Avery said. "I'm Avery." "I know," Sophie said, and stepped back to let her in. The farmer's market was 3 blocks away, spread across the parking lot of the community center, in the particular slightly chaotic way of markets run by people who love what they sell and are less focused on the logistics of how they sell it. Sophie navigated it with the confidence of a regular, pulling Logan toward the bread stand, then toward the woman who sold honey in small jars, then toward the table with the ceramic mugs she'd been wanting him to look at for 2 months. Avery kept up without making a show of it. She bought a jar of honey without being prompted, which Sophie noticed and approved of. She asked the bread vendor a question about sourdough fermentation that surprised Logan, specific enough that the vendor got genuinely enthusiastic, and they stood there for 5 minutes talking about it while Sophie ate a sample and Logan held the bread bag. "You bake?" he said when they were walking again. "I've tried," Avery said. "I've had mixed results. My apartment doesn't hold temperature well." "That's the worst excuse," Logan said. "It's a legitimate variable," she said. "You're a CEO. Buy a better oven." She laughed, the actual laugh, the one that happened when she wasn't thinking about it, slightly too loud for the volume of the conversation. Sophie looked up at the sound of it, and then looked at Logan with an expression he couldn't fully read, but that seemed generally positive. They got coffee at the stand near the far end. Sophie got hot chocolate. It was 46 degrees, and she considered this full justification. They stood at one of the high tables near the edge of the market and drank their drinks, and the November morning went on around them, ordinary and unhurried. Dad says you went to the same college as the woman who designed the Millbrook Bridge, Sophie said to Avery, out of nowhere. Avery blinked. What? Logan had no memory of telling Sophie this. He was reasonably certain he hadn't told Sophie this. I looked you up, Sophie said matter-of-factly. Online for research. Sophie, Logan said. She's important at the company, Sophie said, as though this was a complete explanation. I wanted to know about her. She looked at Avery. Did you know her? The bridge woman? Avery had recovered from the surprise and was looking at Sophie with something between amusement and genuine delight. She was a few years ahead of me. I knew who she was. She paused. You researched the bridge designer? I researched suspension bridges, Sophie said. She came up. A pause. She won an award. She did, Avery said. She was very good. I want to win an award, Sophie said with complete seriousness, drinking her hot chocolate. What kind? Avery said, matching the seriousness perfectly. Sophie thought about it. For building something, she said. Something real. Not a trophy kind. The kind where the thing is still there after. Avery looked at her for a long moment. That's the best kind, she said. Sophie nodded like this was the confirmation she'd been looking for. She finished her hot chocolate. She went to look at the table of wooden toys at the next stand, and Logan and Avery stood at the high table with their drinks and watched her. She's extraordinary, Avery said quietly. I know, Logan said. She researched you too, when you were at the company. She told me she looked up the operational records in the third quarter because she wanted to understand what you fixed. When did she tell you that? Just now, in the truck conversation. Avery looked at him. She was awake more than you knew. He shook his head slowly. He thought about all the conversations he'd assumed were private that had apparently been filtered through his daughter's partial consciousness. He was going to have to adjust some assumptions. Sophie came back with a small wooden puzzle she was already taking apart. Can I have this? How much? Logan said. $12. He gave her the $12. She went back to pay for it. Avery was quiet beside him, both hands around her coffee. Thank you for letting me come today, she said. She asked, Logan said. Technically, she arranged this, not me. I know, Avery said. But you let her. He looked at her. The November light was flat and gray and made everything look equal. The market stalls, the bare trees at the edge of the lot, her face beside him, the coffee steam between them. Yeah, he said. I let her. The months had a way of stacking quietly when nothing in them was dramatic. December brought the first ice of the season and a company holiday party that Avery navigated with the slightly improved confidence of a CEO who had, in the preceding 2 months, actually started to trust the room she was in. Logan sat at a table with Patricia Cho and Marcus Webb and 2 vendors whose contracts he'd renegotiated in November, and the evening was not remarkable except that at one point across the room, he and Avery caught eyes during a conversation each of them was stuck in, and the brief exchange of expressions between them, the mutual acknowledgement of minor social entrapment, was so fluent that Patricia Cho beside him said, You two talk without talking. You know that? He picked up his drink and didn't answer, which Patricia correctly interpreted as confirmation. January was Sophie's winter break project, a new bridge design, this one with a central pier, rendered in cardboard and wood glue, and an amount of structural annotation in her notebook that her teacher later described as not what I expected from a third grader, but I'm not going to tell her to stop. Avery came over twice that month, both times on Saturday mornings, and by the second visit she was at the kitchen table with Sophie and a ruler while Logan made lunch, and the conversation he could hear from the kitchen was about load-bearing ratios and also about whether the gecko at Sophie's school could recognize faces. Animals recognize faces more than people think, Avery said. Mr. Fernandez looks at me differently than he looks at Madison, Sophie said. That could be light angle. I've tested for light angle, Sophie said. How? I moved to different spots and timed the looking, Sophie said. Same duration at me, shorter at Madison. I did it 8 times. A pause. That's actually a valid methodology, Avery said. I know, Sophie said. Logan stood at the kitchen counter and listened to his daughter and the woman who had fired him and come to his door and found the truth and brought it back, and he thought about second chances. Not in the abstract way people talk about them, the tidy narrative version, but in the practical way, the way they actually worked, which was not a dramatic reversal, but an accumulation of small, ordinary moments that built something new over the place where the old thing had been. He made sandwiches, he brought them to the table. Sophie and Avery made room for him without stopping their conversation, which was now about whether you could train a gecko using positive reinforcement. Probably, Avery said. Reptiles are more trainable than people assume. That's what I think, Sophie said. I want to try it, but Ms. Nolan said the gecko is a school gecko and not a study subject. Mrs. Nolan has a point, Logan said. Miss Nolan doesn't know what she's missing, Sophie said. February brought a cold snap and a problem with one of the new vendor contracts that Logan and Avery spent the better part of a week untangling, and somewhere in the middle of that week, a late Tuesday, both of them on his office couch with their laptops and the contract spread on the coffee table, the building mostly empty. She fell asleep. Not dramatically. Just, he looked over and she was out, head against the couch arm, laptop still open on her legs. She'd been in the office since 7 that morning. It was 9:40 at night. He took the laptop off her legs without waking her, closed both laptops, got his jacket from the coat rack and put it over her. He sat back down and read through the contract alone for another 40 minutes until he'd found the clause they'd been looking for, and he wrote it up in an email to Dale. And then he sat in the quiet office for a while and watched the loading dock lights through the window and thought about nothing in particular. She woke up at 10:23, sat up, saw the jacket, looked at him. You found it, he said. He turned the laptop to show her his notes. She read them. Her hair was slightly flattened on the left side. She was not, he had learned, someone who needed to perform coherence when they'd just woken up. She read the notes the way she read everything, fast and with her whole attention. And then she said, the indemnification subclause. That's the trap, he said. Same mechanism as Meridian. You found it. You would have found it if you weren't asleep, he said. She looked at him. She had his jacket draped around her shoulders, and she looked entirely unlike a CEO and entirely like herself. And he had been here long enough and close enough to understand the difference and know which one he preferred. Logan, she said. Yeah. She held his gaze for a moment. No management, no distance, no careful calibration. Just her looking at him with all of it showing. I'm going to say something, she said. Okay. I don't know how to do this quietly, she said. I've tried to do it quietly for 4 months and I'm not good at it. I'm better at direct. She stopped. I'm in this. Whatever this is. I've been in it for a while and I want you to know that. Not because of the job or the company or because I owe you anything. That's all separate. You know it's separate. Just because of... She stopped again. Just because of you. You and Sophie and the bridge drawings and the hot chocolate in 46-degree weather and the fact that you put my laptop somewhere safe while I was asleep. The office was quiet. I know this is complicated, she said. I know the work situation is complicated and the Sophie situation requires careful... Avery, he said. She stopped. I know, he said. He said it the way he said most things, quietly, without decoration, but she understood what it meant. She'd learned to read him the same way he'd learned to read her, in the accumulation of small months. She exhaled slowly, not relief exactly, more like the release of something held carefully for a long time. Okay, she said. Okay, he said. He didn't reach for her hand. She didn't move closer. They sat on the office couch with the contract between them and the loading dock lights through the window and the late hour around them, and the thing between them settled into its actual shape without requiring a dramatic gesture to make it real. Oh. Spring came the way it always does, gradually, and then suddenly, the way all the things that matter most seem to arrive. The maple tree in Logan's backyard leafed out in April, the young branches filling in with the particular bright green of new growth. Sophie had been measuring it since they'd moved in, a series of pencil marks on the door frame of the back door that recorded the tree's height in the same column as her own. The tree was catching up. On a Saturday in late April, they planted bulbs along the fence line. It was Sophie's project. She'd researched what would come back year after year, had made a list with Latin names that she presented to Logan with characteristic precision, had bought the bulbs at the farmer's market from a woman who'd apparently given her a 10-minute consultation on planting depth. Avery was there with her sleeves rolled up and her hands in the dirt, following Sophie's planting directions with the focused attention she brought to everything, asking questions when she didn't know something and not pretending she did. Logan watched them from the porch step. Sophie was explaining the drainage requirements for the section near the fence. Avery was listening with genuine attention, and Logan recognized the expression on Avery's face, the one he'd first seen in the truck on Route 9, when Sophie had been asleep in the back seat and Avery had said she's beautiful with the unguarded honesty of someone who hadn't planned to say it out loud. The expression hadn't changed much since then. It was just less of a surprise now. Sophie looked up from the dirt. "Dad, come help. This section needs 3 more." He came down from the porch, took the trowel Sophie handed him, knelt in the cold spring dirt beside the fence with his daughter on one side and Avery on the other, and the 3 of them planted the last of the bulbs in the late afternoon light while the maple tree held its green above them. They didn't talk much while they worked. The yard had its own sounds, birds and the neighbor's wind chime, and Sophie narrating quietly to herself about the spacing. Good sounds. The sounds of a Saturday afternoon that is not trying to be anything other than what it is. After, they washed their hands at the outdoor spigot, all 3 in a row, the water cold enough to make Sophie complain, and Logan ignore the complaint, and Avery laugh. Sophie stood back and looked at the fence line. The dirt was dark and turned over neatly, and there was nothing to see yet, just soil and the small markers she'd put in for each grouping. "They won't come up for weeks," she said. "That's how bulbs work," Logan said. "I know that." She looked at the dirt seriously. "I just want to see them." "You have to wait," Avery said. "I know," Sophie said. She sounded approximately accepting of this. "But I'm going to check every morning." "Every morning," Avery agreed. Sophie looked at the maple tree, looked at her pencil mark on the back door frame, then looked at the 2 adults beside her with the particular clarity of an 8-year-old who has observed things carefully and drawn her conclusions. "I think it's going to be a good spring," she said. Not a question, a determination. Logan looked at the fence line, the dark-turned earth, the young tree against the April sky. He looked at Sophie, and then at Avery beside him, who was looking at the garden with her arms crossed and her face open and her hair pulled back in the particular expression of someone who has found something they weren't looking for and has decided to stay. He thought about the morning in September that had started with his daughter not wanting him to leave and had ended in a conference room with the quiet implosion of something he'd spent 3 years building. He thought about sitting in his truck in the parking lot afterward and running the numbers and deciding what came next with the same practical discipline he brought to every bad situation. He thought about the rainstorm, the hazard lights clicking in the dark, the jacket. He thought about what people told you when things fell apart, that it built character, that it happened for a reason, that good things rose from the wreckage. He'd never entirely trusted those formulations. They were too neat. They assumed the rubble had a plan. What he believed, from the evidence of his own life, was something simpler and less comfortable. Things happened, and then other things happened. And if you stayed honest and stayed steady and kept showing up with your whole self rather than the managed version, eventually the things that happened started to build something worth having. Not because the universe intended it, just because that was what steadiness, practiced long enough, sometimes produced. He thought about something General Calloway had said, not in Dale's office, but years earlier, in the last weeks before Logan left the Army. They'd been going over logistics reports, routine, unremarkable, and Calloway had looked up from the documents and said, unprompted, "The best thing you can build in this life, Mercer, is a situation where the people who depend on you can trust the ground under them." He'd meant it in the operational sense, but Logan had taken it home and carried it. He'd been building that ground, plank by plank, decision by decision, ordinary Saturday by ordinary Saturday. "Hey," Avery said beside him quietly, not a request for anything specific. "Hey," he said back. Sophie had already moved to the maple tree, standing under it with one hand on the bark, looking up at the new leaves with the expression of someone doing inventory. The evening light was coming in low and golden across the yard, catching the fence line, the fresh soil, the bright young green overhead. The bulbs were underground, doing their slow work. They would come up in May. Sophie would check every morning until they did, and when they finally broke the surface, she would mark the date in the notebook she kept for things she was tracking. Logan stood in his backyard in the April evening with his daughter and the woman who had walked a hard road to get here, and he didn't try to make the moment more than it was. It was enough. It was exactly enough. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, enough was the whole thing.